friends, and welcome to Smart Loving Conversations, the place where we discuss all things Catholic marriage. I'm Francine Parola.
And I'm Laura Kane from Smartloving, a global network that accompanies couples as we together explore how to maximise the good times and learn from the bad ones.
With our guests, we explore love, marriage, family, and living the Catholic faith, setting our sights on heaven while keeping our feet on the ground, or in the mud and muck that life throws our way. We've been there, and so have our guests.
Join us for better and for worse as we dive deep into real-life conversations of struggle and triumph.
Welcome, friends and listeners of Radio Maria Australia, to Smart Loving Conversations. This episode, we're talking about how to love smarter.
We are so pleased that you are joining us today, friends. We don't have a guest this week, but Francine and I are going to explore this topic of how to love smarter. And we would just love to put the invitation out there. If you are a Smart Loving graduate, maybe you've done one of our courses and you would like to be a guest on the program, please reach out to us via info@marriagerc.org. So, Fran, how is your walk with the Lord these past days?
Oh, Laura, it's been a really rich couple of weeks. I've been working on trying to just get a more disciplined and structured prayer life. And so I've just been doing Lectio Divina, and I'm finding the blessings of Scripture are just multiplying with that kind of regular time with the Lord. I'm really hearing His voice so much more clearly, and just feeling very much blessed by that process. I can highly recommend just that kind of structured discipline. And Lectio Divina is really simple. It's got a nice balance for me of structure, but also just with some free prayer and reflection time as well. So it's not just like a rote prayers over and over or just reading continuously. I like being able to just sit in the presence of the Lord and listen for His voice.
And do you do that by yourself, Fran, or with a group?
Yeah. Yeah, mostly just do it by myself, just in the morning.
Beautiful. Well, at the moment for me, I'm just feeling like a desire to read God's word, and I have a beautiful Word on Fire Bible, which you gave to me. It was a beautiful gift. And as you know, it's this beautifully printed Bible of the Gospels, and it's got reflections from the amazing Bishop Robert Barron. I find him so enriching, anything he films or writes. So I'm walking with the Lord through the Gospels and then reading Bishop Barron's reflections on those Gospels, and just really enriching and nourishing. And I actually have the Bible in our guest room, and so that guest room's always made out, the beds are made and it's a nice clean minimalist vibe going on in there, so it's become like this little retreat space.
Oh, nice.
So it's nice to just if the house is a mess, I just retreat in there and read a parable and read a reflection. So I'm just journeying with the Lord in that way.
It's good to have a little bit of a space in the home, isn't it, where you can just go, and it's conducive to prayer. I have a space in our front room, but it doesn't get the morning sun. So I always want to go out to the back of the house, which is a little bit busier, but it does have the sun, and my kids tend to be late sleepers. So it's actually not too busy in the morning when I'm there. So shall we get into it? Let's unpack the topic, how to love smarter. So there's a real art and science to loving, and most people think that love is spontaneous or instinctual, that we kind of inherited this idea from our culture. I think that because love has such strong emotions associated with it, we tend to think of love as an emotion. But the reality is there's actually quite a bit of research around it, and there's some really good tips. And also we can bring our will and our intellect to the process of loving in a way that will help us get a more effective, and just be more effective sounds like it's sort of orchestrated or artificial in some way, but it's actually more about being sincere and making sure that our efforts to love are really hitting the mark. So to unpack that a little bit more, everyone experiences love a little bit differently. It's sort of like a personality, and we call it a unique love profile. So I have a pattern, if you like, of gestures or actions or experiences that speak love powerfully to me, and it will be quite unique to me, and the same as with Laura and each of our listeners. But the thing is that we tend to give love or express love in the way that we like to receive it, rather than how the other experiences. So we're really tending to love by instinct rather than intention. So the whole principle of smart loving, it's our brand name, but it's also a framework, if you like, or a principle, is to love the other the way they like and need to be loved. So I'll just repeat that. Smart loving is loving the other the way they like and need to be loved. And it's really one of the most important little ideas that we present pretty much in all of our courses. And there's 3 pillars, if you like, or foundations to that. The first one is that love is a choice. It's not just an emotion. It's something we can bring our will to, and we can choose to love, even if our feelings aren't feeling very loving at the time. It's other-centered. So we're thinking about the other person and how they like and experience love. So in some ways, it's actually a very genuine, authentic love, because we're orientating and thinking about the other person. And finally, it's smart, it's effective, because if we're going to love, if we're going to go to the trouble of trying to express love, we really want it to actually hit the mark and make an impact on the other person, rather than just let us feel good because we've done something generous or loving towards the other person. We want them to also feel the benefit of our gesture. So there's the 3 pillars, if you like, of smart loving. Loving the other the way they like and need to be loved. Laura, what's your reaction, or what was your reaction to the idea that you can choose to love? Do you remember when you first heard that idea? And
I do. I do recall the time when I first heard the presentation of the idea that you can choose to love. And at first I thought, oh, it doesn't sound very romantic because, I didn't want to have to choose to love my husband. I wanted for it to come naturally, because obviously it's easier if something comes naturally and it's a bit more fun and free. But being introduced to the idea that you can choose to love the other, it prepared me that there would be times when I did not feel like loving Joe, my husband Joseph. So after almost a decade of marriage, my reaction now to that idea that you can choose to love is yes, absolutely you can. And I can recall many times when I choose to love Joseph, when we were first married, I needed to become more methodical and organized in the cleaning and packing away of my items in the home. So I'd never lived with anyone besides my own family before. And so when Joe and I were married and we had our own small apartment, I had to learn how to live with him and not be messy. Like in my family of origin, I had my own bathroom and ensuite. So I was able to leave, my makeup out and my hair care products out, and without complaints from other family members. So when I moved in with Joe after marriage, I had this bad habit. And so when he would come in and need to, shave and put his shaving cream out, there would just be all of my items out on the out on the bathroom. So we had to have a conversation about that. And, he was just saying, I would love you to love me in this way and just get up a little bit earlier, 10 minutes earlier, and wipe down the bathroom and prepare it for me. And did I feel like doing that every morning? No, but I would say in my mind, I'm going to choose to love Joe in this way. This is what he's asked for and what he needs. And then, of course, when Joe would notice that I made that effort and chose to love him in that way, he would thank me for doing that, and I'd get this little bit of praise and affirmation. So I wanted to do it again and again. So slowly it became a habit. So I really find that, Fran, and you probably experienced the same,
yep.
marriage brings your faults to the surface. I needed to grow as a human being in that area of my organization and life. And the impact of choosing to love Joe in that way is making me the best version of myself.
Yep.
So that's
Yep.
choosing to love, I think, is, I really agree with that concept. Even
Mm.
if it isn't, even if it isn't so romantic all the time, it's a
Yep.
choice. Love
Yep.
is a choice. That's my own experience.
I guess it's at the pointy end of in our marriage with Byron. It really comes into play when I'm feeling a bit hurt with him and I'm annoyed or I'm disappointed or I'm just wounded. That's where the choice to love really becomes very intentional, conscientious. There's lots of little ways that I think are not that difficult. Like an example we often share is, Byron's always been very sensitive to the dirt on the floors. I think it's an Italian thing. When we went to Italy, they always seem to be sweeping. If we got up early enough, like not just when we lived there, we'd be up early to go shopping and they'd be all sweeping. So I think it comes through his Italian genes. But it never, the dirt on the floor never really bothered me that much. And I'd be there all day with little kids and things, and the floor just gets pretty gross
Crumbs.
after
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and sand from the sand pit and everything else. And he'd come home from work with his leather-soled shoes and it would go crunch, crunch on the sand, and he'd be reaching for the broom the minute he got in the door. So it was just a really simple thing for me to make the decision to, hey, he's just texted me, he's on his way home, let me quickly sweep the floor so that when he comes in, he's not distracted by his shoes crunching on the sand. He can give me his attention. I can give my attention to him. And so that was a relatively simple thing because it avoided attention arising. But I guess it's much more challenging when I'm feeling really wounded or neglected or upset with him. That's when I guess the decision to forgive is one way that I can choose to love, or the decision to try to suspend judgment. Something's happened and my first instinct is to interpret it in a really hurtful way.
Mm.
And making the decision to say, no, hang on a minute, I'm not going to jump to conclusions. Let me suspend judgment until he's had a chance to explain what he meant or why, and so on. That came up a lot with lateness. Like, he'd say he'd be home at a certain time and that time would come and go. And it happens quite often. He's in a work that's very unpredictable, whereas I'm working from home, so I'm always here. So that was another area that I think I had to learn to say, don't jump to the conclusion that he just doesn't care or he's being negligent in some way, but to hold open a curiosity and an openness and a receptivity to him, or a different way of interpreting. That's where my decision to love really comes into play.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful examples, Fran.
Yeah, well, likewise. Okay, so that's kind of the basic introduction to the idea of smart loving or smarter loving.
Mm.
I want to enrich it a little bit and keep sort of going deeper by bringing into our conversation a really popular model that probably many of our listeners have already heard of, and that's the 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. And it's really, in some ways, same sort of idea of loving the other way they like and need to be loved. But he uses the word love languages, and he's identified 5 common patterns, if you like, or languages in which people communicate love. And they are, number 1, words of affirmation; 2, quality time; 3, acts of service; 4, receiving gifts; and 5, physical touch. And the model kind of basically says that, well, we've got a primary language and then a secondary one that comes into play a little bit less strongly. And that the way we tend to express love tends to be the way we experience it, so that's consistent. But the primary love language will be the one that just really resonates with us. And so if we want to communicate love effectively, we need to know the other's love language. And on their website, if you just do a Google search for love languages, you can do little online quizzes where they'll help you basically rank your love languages in order of importance. And so it can be really helpful for couples. You can think about it also in terms of your relationships with your children. What's their love language? So Laura, what's your primary love language? How does it play out?
Yeah, my primary love language would be words of affirmation. I love to be told that I'm doing a good job. And I love if I've made a meal, I want to hear how delicious it is. Appreciation goes a long way for me and it makes me feel more in love and connected with Joe. So if I feel I'm being criticized, it really does hurt me and takes me a while to reconnect and I get defensive. And so, yeah, it takes me a while to get back to where we were. And my secondary love language, I think, would be quality time. So having quality time together, a good conversation over a meal, a date night, even watching TV together. We often pause it and, something in the TV show brings up something and we pause it and have a chat. So sharing a glass of wine. I love just those moments of quality time and being together.
Mm. And what about Joe? What's his primary love language, do you reckon?
Oh, I think, definitely quality time as well and words of affirmation. But so his would be quality time as a higher, as his primary. And yeah, he also loves words of affirmation too. So we're similar in that regard.
Oh, that's a great blessing, because when you've
Yes.
got that similarity, even though you probably your primary and your secondary are swapped, you're going to be hitting the mark most of the time, even without thinking about it. Um, for me, my primary love language, I think, is physical touch. That came through really strongly when I did the sort of the quiz probably about 25 years ago. And then quality time. But Byron's is probably receiving gifts and secondly acts of service, or maybe swapped around. So we've got, our profiles are completely inversed.
Wow.
So, and we've had many really funny encounters, like many of our graduates from our courses have heard us tell the story about Byron buying chocolates on his way home in the airport. He travels a lot for his work as a consultant, and he'd be feeling a little bit guilty that he'd been away for the week, so he'd pick up the chocolates in the airport. And I don't mind chocolate, but it's not my love language, right? Physical touch, quality time, that's my love language. So, he'd give them to me and I'd pop them in the fridge for later or keep them for guests. And, of course, he'd go hunting in the fridge for the chocolates later on. So he was trying hard. But I wasn't meeting my needs. And similarly, physical touch. And when I think of physical touch, it's not just, I'm not talking so much about lovemaking in that context. I'm thinking about the hugs, the kisses, the massages, and things like there can be times for me when we had staff in the workplace where I sort of, my instinct would be to say, hey, you're looking really stressed. And I'd give them a shoulder rub. And I had to kind of really go, oh, hang on, maybe that's crossing a bit of a boundary here. It's fine to do that for a friend or your sister or your husband or your kids, but maybe not for your colleague at work.
But you're also a mum as well. So, your physical, that's how you show appreciation and love. So that's funny.
Really, really, and really obvious when I've got the grandchildren over, and their little kids are so physical. I think that's why I actually really love being involved with little kids, and I find teenagers a little bit harder because the teenagers tend to withdraw that little bit physically, and it's awkward. You sort of go in for a hug with your teenage son, and it's like, oh, okay, mom. They tolerate it. But with the little kids, it's also physical. It's natural. So I think that's why. One of the reasons why, anyway.
Joe and I have a funny little couple routine we do to make sure we often show each other affection. Whenever we're on an escalator, we have a rule: couple connect kiss. And so as we're going up the escalator, we'll have a peck on the lips, and you're often going in the shopping centre together, so it makes it part of our routine schedule, physical affection. So
that's too funny, and it's in public too. It's sort of like a crowded escalator with people wondering whether you're going to remember to step off when you get to the end of the escalator.
That's it. Trying to be a sign of our witness to love in that way in the shopping centre. That's funny. Well, on that note, let's take a quick break and we'll come back to explore more ways we can love smarter.
Welcome back to Smart Loving Conversations. We've been talking about how to love smarter, and we're now ready to go deeper. So, Laura, we're talking previously about the 5 love languages. There's another really great model that's been very influential in our work in Smart Loving, and that's Willard Harley's His Needs, Her Needs. Willard Harley is a Christian psychologist, and he really put a lot of kind of scientific sort of analysis into trying to break down and understand what makes a marriage successful. He was working with a lot of couples who were divorcing, and he was despairing that they weren't recovering. So he actually stopped charging money to work with couples and started making it into a study. And so what he identified in his model was that there was the idea of emotional needs, that we have these needs that have strong emotions attached to it, and when people meet our emotional needs, we feel bonded to them. We experience a sense of love. And so he then set out to try to identify, well, what were the typical emotional needs? And as he surveyed couples and worked with them, 10 emotional needs came up, over and over again. I'll name them really quickly: affection, sexual fulfillment, intimate conversation, recreational companionship, honesty and openness, physical attractiveness, financial support, domestic support, family commitment, and admiration. And I know when I see that list, I think, oh yeah, all of those sound really good. But there are some that are perhaps a little bit stronger than others for me. And I recognise that some of those would be more relevant to Byron. And he found that as well, that there were some differences and a pattern of sexual differences that occurred. Keeping in mind that when we talk about sexual differences and patterns, we're not talking about stereotypes. So we're not trying to sort of box people and make them conform. As we know, our sexual experiences, or our sexual expression is a little bit on a spectrum, and we can be strongly in one and less strongly in another in terms of conforming to a typical pattern associated with our sex or our gender. So that was kind of interesting to sort of see, that women where I, for example, identified affection and intimate conversation as far more strongly than men did, and likewise sexual fulfillment and recreational companionship was more strongly identified as for men. He also, so he had these sort of emotional needs. So he kind of then started to think about, well, what do we need to do we need to meet those needs in a framework of building love in the relationship. But then he also started to look at some of the negatives, and he called those love busters. What are the things or the gestures that people do? And he identified a bunch of those. I won't go into explaining all of those, but it was kind of a nice model that seemed to work and resonate with people, and was getting, more importantly, was getting results. So again, this idea of a love profile, that we have a kind of a pattern of priority in terms of these emotional needs that really speak powerfully to us. But then there was also a profile in the kind of the negative and the love buster sense. I think he came up with about 5 common love busters, and people would then, there wasn't a stronger sexual pattern in terms of male and female preferring, identifying one or the other. But there was, typically, I think he had 5, as I said, but there would be 1 or 2 that would be really the most negative, or that had the most negative impact. So, Laura, love builders and love busters. What's your top builder and your bottom buster, if you like, or your...
Yeah, my love builders for me, for sure, is when Joe expresses appreciation for me. So being considerate and thoughtful, giving way to my preferences. For instance, if what would you like to eat for dinner tonight if we're getting takeaway, or a choice of what we do on the weekend. Affirming my strength in, embodying character. I'm really proud of you getting up early to go to Pilates. That shows a lot of good on you for dedicating time and to your health, and for showing the strength of character to wake up early. Thank you for working hard to contribute to our family and to help contribute to the bills. So yeah, that for me just makes me feel super connected and builds up that loving trust. And busters for me is criticism. So if he's teasing me in front of others, or I feel like I'm coming off negatively with a story he's telling, it really irks me. Or even nagging me or reminding me things I need to do, especially if I know I'm going to get to them. I've got them on my to-do list, and if he reminds me, I want to just have them be done without him reminding me, if that makes sense. So I think it goes to my woundedness as well, and my pride, but they're my builders and my love busters on reflection of myself. It's good for Joe to know that and be aware of it, and he can approach if he needs to bring something up with me, like the messy bathroom. He can do it in a way that I don't feel criticized, or that I'm a flawed wife, which I am, of course. But
we've all got those points of vulnerability. And I guess for me, openness and honesty is one of the a really strong one for me. And I suppose intimate conversation, again, love the opportunity to just have those conversations that we can share each other's feelings and let each other into our interior world and so on. That's really important. And I guess that relates to the openness and honesty, because a good conversation is open and and is honest. And likewise, I guess on the flip side of that the key love buster would be any sense of withholding, keeping secrets, or not letting me in to when he's trying to make a decision. And Byron might just be really busy and pressured and under just having to make a decision quickly. That stings to me, to be excluded from those important decisions, even though it can be really perfectly understandable. And likewise for him, I think he's often expressed his real appreciation for recreational companionship. That's quite a big one for him, that he really just enjoys sometimes my company when he's doing a chore, like cleaning the pool. He doesn't necessarily want me to come and clean the pool with him, but if I just hang around and chat with him while he's doing that, he really appreciates it. And so that's kind of been a pattern that I've noticed with him, that he doesn't have a lot of recreation. So sometimes doing the physical chores around the house is one of the ways that he gets exercise. So it feels therapeutic to him in a way, even if it's a really mundane thing like sweeping out the water that pools in our front gutter. But he really, really likes it if I can just hang out and keep him company while he's doing that.
Yeah, shoulder-to-shoulder bonding while the task gets done.
Yeah, and you see that a lot with men generally, that kind of, working together on the working bee or the building bee or something like that up at the school or the parish, that there is, I think, a very natural bonding that happens when they're doing that work together, physical work together.
Yeah, Joe often says that for dates. He says that, when you go on a first date, if you're having a meal as a man with a woman, it's all intimate conversation, right? And if that's the stronger suit for the female, Joe often recommends to single guys that we know, he's like, take them out bowling or go on a bushwalk. That shoulder to shoulder bonding seems to be less intimidating for the guy. So that's interesting. You say, Byron likes, that recreational companionship.
Yeah.
In
And
the
it's
same
not a
way,
time for
Joe's noted that.
really cozy conversation. It's often just mundane observations or just chit chat. It's company, not so much intimate conversation at all.
Yeah, so interesting. And
Yeah.
differences, female and male
Yes.
differences. Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, but also just unique to the person and knowing where to target our focus. So just taking it a little bit further, going deeper with the sexual differences, another author and therapist that has been really influential, helpful is Emerson Eggerichs. He's a Christian pastor, and he's got a program and a book called Love and Respect. And he draws on the St. Paul's letter to the Ephesians in Ephesians 5. There's that really famous letter where he addresses it to husbands and wives, and he starts with be subject to one another out of reverence for Christ, and then details it out, and wives do this and husbands do that. We won't read the whole thing now. And then concludes with each of you, however, should love his wife as himself, and a wife should respect her husband. So there's this strong element of husbands being commanded to love their wives and wives being commanded to respect their husbands. And he breaks it down. So a really important aspect of it is understanding that the word love in English, in the original ancient Greek, it was agape. And the Greeks used a couple of different words to describe love. And agape is sort of understood or defined as a kind of a charity or sacrificial love, as a kind of service. So a little bit different to eros, which was another word that the Greeks used, but that's where we get our word erotic from. It's kind of got a more passion or emotional dimension to it, or a desire as part of that. And then you get things like philia and storge and so on as the other four. So they talk about 4 different words the Greeks had for love, but he uses agape here. So this idea of sacrificial love, and then also respect. He just really challenges the idea that respect has to be earned. So I don't know about you, Laura, but for me, I've absorbed that cultural assumption that respect is something that you earn by your good behaviour or by your performance, and then you are given respect as a sort of a reward for being worthy of the respect. But Emerson Eggerichs sort of says, no, that this is actually something that's so fundamental to the sense of a man's feeling accepted in the relationship and connected, that we need to challenge our thinking on that to be able to offer our husbands as wives respect, irrespective of whether we think they deserve it or not.
And well, if you're looking at it, my reaction would be to that idea of respect owed, not earned. As a Christian, we look at all humans with respect, like respect for life, respect they're created in the image and likeness of God. I guess, you're so familiar with your husband, and it's like you've got to remember that. And like, would you have that basic respect for their manliness, for their position in your life as your husband? Like that's I do think that, we need to respect our husbands. It's really important. And I definitely, Joe would definitely feel if he felt disrespected, it would be a love buster for him. So I've, over the years, I've understood that, for a man, it's so important to feel respected by his wife.
Well, and it's really interesting that you mentioned about it kind of in the inverse, in the sort of the absence of it. And because it's actually the preferences show up even more strongly in the absence. So if I were to ask you, Laura, do you prefer to be loved or respected? You'd probably say, like most people, well, I like them both, right? I don't want to be disrespected.
Of course.
But when they look at some studies, that if you're given if you have to choose between 2 negative outcomes, to be alone and unloved, or to be inadequate and disrespected, and I'm citing here some research by Shaunti Feldham, another Christian author, there's a real sexual bias that for men it is much worse to be inadequate and disrespected than it is to be alone and unloved. So something that's about sort of around 75 to 80%. And the inverse for women, that for women, most women would say being alone and unloved is more terrifying or awful than being inadequate and disrespected.
So
Uh,
interesting.
it is, and it plays into, and it's interesting that St. Paul, all these years and years ago, centuries ago, had an instinct for this and was able to, I guess, well, he was writing under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, but there's this kind of really beautiful insight into the unique way that men and women can really respond in love to each other in a way that's tailored to who they are and their identity in their sexual being.
That's so interesting. We're going to take a quick break now and come back to give some examples. Hello and welcome back. You're listening to Smart Loving Conversations on Radio Maria Australia. We've been talking about how to love smarter, and now it's time to get practical.
So, if you remember from our previous segment there, we were talking about love and respect from St. Paul's letter to the Ephesians, and how he gives us instructions for husbands to love their wives and women to respect their husbands. One of the things that we like to do in Smart Loving is that we prefer to use the word cherishment instead of love, for the reason that what St. Paul is talking about is a particular type of love, which in the Greek it's agape. And when you break that down and you look at the details of how he tells the husbands to love their wives, it really is much better encapsulated by the English word cherishment. And so we like to use cherishment and respect as two sort of expressions of love. And we would say that, respect is also a way of loving. They're both ways of loving, but that one speaks particularly powerfully to the feminine heart and the other particularly powerfully to the masculine heart. And so the challenge as couples living under the authority of Christ is to love each other in the way that the other most experiences it. So for me as a wife, that means to pay particular attention to the way I expressed my respect for Byron, and for him to particularly be attentive to the needs for cherishment in me. So Laura, have you got an example? I mean, we like to contrast smart loving with dopey loving.
Yes, I've got lots of examples of dopey loving.
Yeah, okay. Why don't you share with us?
Oh, yes. So when we were first married, and we give this example to our engaged couples that we sponsor, I was dopey loving when we first got married, wanting to, show my love by doing household chores as an act of love. I remember one time I was doing the laundry and I'd completed all the tasks. Joe said, "Oh, Laura, thanks so much for doing the laundry. Could I just ask you a favor though, that could you please do my top on my business shirts? Could you please button the top button on my business shirt?" And of course, I roll. I thought, "Oh gosh, Joe, isn't it enough that I've done the laundry and put all the shirts on the coat hangers?" And he, said to me, "Remember the smart loving, this is the way I want and need to be loved." And I just started laughing and I thought, yep, you're right. So for me, if I have a shirt that needs buttoning up, I just put it on the coat hanger because I find it easier to take off. But Joe likes to steam it, so having the top button done up allows him to steam his shirts easier. So there you go. That was, now I'm just like, I do the top button up on his business shirts as an act of love, and we've never looked back. But that was my example of dopey loving, and not wanting to do it his way, even though that was how I could show him love and respect and honor him. So yeah, it's just so simple, isn't it, Fran? But
and I think
it really
that's the
makes a
point, isn't it?
difference.
Really, is that it's sometimes it's not the big grand gesture that makes or breaks a marriage. It's these little tiny that seem on their own to be so trivial, but accumulatively they actually add up to a whole pattern or a profile of loving gesture. And the reality is we either feel loved or we feel unloved by the pinpricks or the light touches. And so rather than kind of being obsessed with how do I do something that's a really big grand gesture, and I think perhaps men might be a little more prone to this than women. They might think, oh, I've got to make up for being away so much, or I've got to make up for, my inadequacy somehow. So we'll plan a big fancy night out. And it's really lovely to have those occasionally. But actually, I think the small daily gestures add up to be much more effective, which brings us to our practical tool for this topic, which is what we call a daily appreciation. And it's really simple. It's just every day to share one thing that I've appreciated about you today, and then we say how it affected me. So I might say to Byron, I've really appreciated how you so faithfully manage the garbage in the house. It's a yucky job, and every week you're emptying the garbage bins and remembering which bin has got to go out. Of course, it's never easy these days, is it? You've got recycling and composting and general rubbish and so on. So, but then the important thing is to not just say what is done, but then to say why I appreciate it. So that gets into a more personal thing. I feel really supported and cherished when you do that. It's something that I dislike doing, and so I really feel very impacted and loved when you do that. So kind of just breaking it down. So it works on a couple of different levels. One is that obviously it builds the self-esteem of the other, that appreciation is one way that we can build the other person up. It also helps me as the person giving the appreciation, because I'm building my gratitude muscle, if you like. I'm scanning for the good rather than disappointment. So even if I'm feeling a bit negative and hurt, by thinking about what have I appreciated about him, it flips me out of focusing on being disappointed into focusing on being blessed. And finally, in a really practical way, it's a way that we give feedback to the other on how we like to feel loved. So it's playing into that idea of how do I get to know what kind of gestures of love my husband wants to have. Well, if he's doing a daily appreciation, I can be alert to what are the things that he's really appreciating. There are obviously the things that are the smart loving rather than the dopey loving. He's not going to appreciate that he's been loved in a dopey way.
Yeah, daily appreciation. I can't emphasize how important this has been for our marriage. For me, as you said, Fran, it stops me taking Joe for granted. So at the end of the day, I'm reflecting on the things he's done throughout the day that made my life better. So it can even be something that he did in the past, but I'm still appreciative of. For example, this morning I sat out on the deck that he built and was having my morning coffee, and the sun was coming down, and our little doggy was looking out and sniffing the wind. And so tonight, when we do our daily appreciation, I'm just going to say thank you so much for building the deck. I just loved it. Was hard work. It was physically demanding labor, and it was new to him. So he had to watch a whole load of YouTube videos and get advice from other carpenters and builders. So it was a difficult task. And so I'm just going to bring that up and say thank you again so much for building the deck. I love sitting out there today. I'm so lucky that I have a husband who's handy like that, and yeah, just appreciate him for that thing that he's done for our family home.
And I've seen that deck. It's an epic deck. It's not like a little weekend hobby thing. It was a really professionally executed. He did a great job on it.
Yeah, thanks, Fran.
You've got the pergola as well with the vines growing over. It's just amazing. It's a really lovely spot.
He really planned it out and put his heart and soul into it. So when I pour out that appreciation every day, then he appreciates me back for whatever he's noticed that I've done throughout the day. Today I prepped our lunches and checked in to see beforehand that he would like what I had in my mind for lunch, so I wasn't dumb loving and giving him something that he didn't want to eat. So he'll probably appreciate me for that. And it's just so sweet, and it melts your heart towards each other when you're loving on each other and appreciating each other for those sometimes mundane tasks.
And I think that's one of the things that we've noticed. We've had some dark days in our marriage where we've just been really hurt with each other, and you kind of get into that snowball kind of system where everything we seem to say or makes it worse rather than better. But the daily appreciation has been a little bit of a circuit breaker for us, because it's pulled us out of feeling self-piteous and sorry for us, myself, and him feeling sorry for himself, and perpetuating that kind of mood of grumpiness into just trying to flip a switch and go into a different way of approaching each other. Really powerful for that kind of mental kind of warfare that goes on. I think in some ways, the spiritual warfare, they say the battle happens in the mind. It's in the way we think. And if there's one place that we know the devil targets, it's marriage and family life. It's a really potent battleground. And so being able to kind of be aware of that, bring it to prayer as well. It's just that really good discipline that helps us counterbalance that negative tendency.
Yeah.
And in fact, I mean, I'd like to say that often our tools are really great for applying into your prayer life. Like if it's good for us as a husband and wife in building our relationship, it's going to be great for us as daughters and sons of the Lord to use that in our prayer life. There's always so much to be thankful for to the
Yes.
Lord. And so praise in some ways is the most foundational of all our type of prayer. But often I think we can come to prayer with this honey-do list. We're going to have a honey-do list for the Lord. Can you fix this? Can you do that? Can you, make the kids go to sleep and stay to sleep tonight? Can you fix the budget? Can you do this?
Help me with this, help me with that.
Yeah,
It's
right.
requests rather than thanks God. I'm so
Yeah,
grateful for everything, all the blessings.
yes. So I think bringing some of this daily appreciation and the mentality and the spirit of it into our prayer life can really be a great asset as well.
That's so true, Fran. We're going to take a quick break now before we do some smart loving Q&A answering.
Hi there, friends. This is Radio Maria Australia, and it's time for our Smart Loving Q&A. We get questions every day from wives, husbands, couples, and sometimes clergy from around the world. So what have you got for us, Laura?
So we often get questions, Fran, from couples who maybe they've been living together for a long time and they are choosing to get married now, and they're wondering why they need to do a marriage preparation course to get married in the Catholic Church. And sometimes we get civilly married couples or couples who were previously married and they think they should be exempt from doing a marriage preparation course. So the question, our smart living question for today is, why do we need to do a marriage preparation course if we're getting married in the Catholic Church? So my answer to these couples would be, like any of the sacraments of the church, you need to learn what you are committing to. So just like when you receive your first Holy Communion or your first sacrament of confession or confirmation, you need to understand the sacramental reality that's taking place. So a Catholic marriage is a sacrament and it's more than a private relationship. A sacrament is a living sign of God's love. And so the church calls all married people to be a living sign of Christ's love for his people. So what's Christ's love like? It's merciful, it's generous, it's self sacrificial love. And, as we've been discussing today, you can learn how to love well and love better and communicate better and show respect and show cherishment to one another. And so a marriage preparation course is just so necessary to ensuring that you are a good witness to God's love through your sacrament of marriage. If you don't do a marriage preparation course, you miss out on all that great content and relationship science and what the church teaches about marriage. So,
Yeah.
Fran, you probably have other points to add to what I've just said.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, you've hit the main point, which is I think it's really easy for us to think that, hey, we've been in this relationship for years and we're getting on really well. That's why we're getting married. What are you going to be teaching us that we don't already know? And sometimes even couples who've been previously married, their first marriage might have ended in divorce, but they'll still feel like, oh, well, I know what I'm doing. I know now what not to do because it didn't work last time. Sometimes they don't even accept any responsibility. They might say it was all the other's fault, so this time's going to be different. So there's certainly an aspect of sort of relationship skills, and we can learn, and we do need to learn that. And I think it's, in some ways, it's a great shame that we can be so resistant to getting support on that really practical thing. It's kind of like we don't try and we go to a doctor or an accountant for specialist financial advice or a doctor for specialist medical advice. We don't just assume that we can get all the answers. And often you can get a good, Google it, you can get some of it, but a specialist who actually knows it really well is really helpful. So there's that aspect, but that's not even the most important aspect. The relationship skills are not the most important. The most important is actually the formation and the spirituality, preparing our hearts to receive the Lord more fully into our life. We're making a vow before the Lord. It's got eternal consequences. Interestingly, the dicastery for laity, family and life, I think it is, and Pope Francis have just recently released new guidelines where they're saying we need to do much, much more marriage preparation, that it should be a minimum of a year. I'm yet to read it and understand it a little bit more. But they're pointing out that, we train priests in the seminary for years and years before we allow them to take their final vows, and that we're doing an injustice to couples if we cut that short. So there's that sort of theological and spiritual preparation, but really importantly is also this idea of journeying on this together. So even if one of them might have been engaged previously and they did a course with their previous fiancé and then subsequently broke up, there's still the need to actually learn and do it together, because the process of discovering this and revisiting these topics brings to the surface a whole lot of really important just insights and opportunities to grow closer in intimacy, to understand each other a little bit better, because every relationship needs to discover its own uniqueness. We often reflect, we were pretty smug when Brian and I, when we were engaged. We had beautiful parents and very successful marriages, but we thought we were going to be better and we'd never face any challenges. We learned pretty quickly that was not the case, that we had plenty of faults. And there was also that we couldn't just take the blueprint from our parents and apply it, that we needed to discover for ourselves what was our particular unique strengths and weaknesses and work to those. So all of those things, that marriage preparation is an opportunity. So whatever circumstance you're in, whether you've only been dating or seriously for a couple of months or a year, or whether you've been married or living together and started a family for over a decade, there's always more to learn. And when you're going to take that vow before the Lord, it's really important to know exactly what you're saying yes to. If you've got questions for us, you can contact us via the Radio Maria website or visit us at smartloving.org/conversations, and there's a form there you can submit your questions.
Before we sign off, we wanted to share a blessing with you. This is going to become a little feature of our podcast. We want to share with you things that have blessed our life. So, Fran, what has blessed you recently?
I'd really like to share the Abiding Together podcast. And in fact, this is where the idea of the bless you comes from. They call it the one thing. It's 3 beautiful women, Sister Miriam Heidland James, Michelle Bedzinger, and I forgot Heather Kim, a Canadian and 2 Americans. Just beautiful, beautiful discussions of these wonderful women talking about pursuing the Lord. Been just such a delight. So it feeds my soul so beautifully. So I really recommend Abiding Together podcast. They're on all the major platforms, or you can go to their website and you can listen to it directly on their website. We'll put the link on our website for you.
Yes. And my bless you, which I mentioned previously in the podcast, is the Word on Fire Bible. So I've got the one, the Gospels, with reflections by Bishop Robert Barron, and also there's reflections from the Church Fathers. So Fran's just told me that there's actually a 2nd edition now, which includes the Acts of the Apostles and the letters. So that's it. As I said, it's blessed me. It's really created this desire for me to read the scriptures more often and retreat to my little retreat area in the home of the guest bedroom, and to just journey with Jesus through those gospels. So
and there's something really nice about the physical beauty of it. Like, it's filled with gorgeous artworks and paintings. And I mean, we're so digitally orientated these days. Like, when I do my Lectio Divina, I'm just using the Universalis app, which just brings up the text, the gospel of the day, so I don't have to flick through, find the particular page. But there is something really beautiful about opening the pages of a book, and it's just this sensory delight that's there.
Yeah, and this book is beautifully printed, and it's like a leather cover with a beautiful like silver edging to it, so it does feel really special and precious. Of course, the Word of God, whatever it's printed on, feels that way, but you just come to reading it with that awe and respect.
And it's nice, the church, the Church Fathers, the commentary there, because there's, I guess, so many people feel like the church that's Christ established is not the same church that we have today, and they want to kind of try and get back and capture some of the original essence of what those apostles and those early church fathers had. So reading the church fathers is one way to connect with that. And, there's lots of continuities that you see there that can be really, really valuable. So that brings us to the end of our time together. You can find more information, including links to our blessings, the show notes and more, at smartloving.org/conversations. That's www.smartloving.org/conversations. We're Francine Parola and Laura Kane from Smart Loving, and we pray that you will be blessed in your walk with the Lord today, and we lift you up and all your intentions to our patron saints, Our Lady Undoer of Knots, pray for us, and St John Paul II, pray for us. This is Radio Maria Australia. Goodbye.